There have been pieces of art that have came out in my lifetime that resonated with me immediately upon viewing or listening. Musical albums like Maxo Cream's Maxo 187, Tyler the Creator's Bastard, and Olivia Rodrigo's Sour. Comics like Urasawa's 20th Century Boy, Robert Kirkman and Cory Walker's Invincible. Then lastly, Mark Millar and John Romita Jr.'s Kickass. Kickass is one of the first comics I read back in middle school. The title alone is what drew me to pick up the comic from the stands. I caught the tail end of the initial run, but was easily able to find the back issues at my LCS. I was infatuated with the idea of a regular, nerdy guy putting on a suit and stopping some bad guys. An idea a child would think was possible. That was the selling point of the series.
Comic books had it wrong. You don't need a power to be a superhero.
If you don't know, Kickass is a comic book series written by Mark Millar and illustrated by John Romita Jr. The series was first published in February 2008. The story follows Dave Lewinsky, a teenager who decides to become a real-life superhero named Kickass, despite having no superpowers, to make his life more exciting and help people. Since the initial run, the comic has expanded into the wider Millarverse, which essentially is a cross-multiverse of all Mark Millar's IPs. Kickass has 4 different story arcs chronicling Dave's time as Kickass. After a certain point, Dave passes the mantle of Kickass to Patience Lee, a black veteran and single mom who assumes the costume identity to steal money from criminals and pay her family's debt. One of the other main characters from the series, Hit Girl, has gotten her own spin-off series as well, following Mindy's time as an assassin. For this video, I want to follow the first 8 issues of Kickass. I believe that this is the best arc because it is more grounded in reality and moves more into a surrealistic realm during this 8-issue comic run, where the later story arcs seem to abandon the whole concept and idea of Dave just being an average guy with a suit. Dave actually has superpowers now in the Miller world canon, so it's safe to say Mark Millar lost the plot. Now, after 10 years removed from my first time reading Kickass and rereading it as an adult, I've come to some real interesting critiques of this comic. I'll dive more into that later, but essentially, Kickass can be perceived as 2 things: as a incel fantasy comic or a master critique on letting fantasy influence reality, plus a hint of white male boredom gone wrong. Let's talk about the writer and co-creator of this comic, Mark Millar. Mark Millar is a Scottish comic book writer who has been writing comics professionally for decades, getting his big break writing on comics like The Authority through DC Comics' Wildstorm imprint. Millar has done a lot of writing for Marvel Comics, working on and writing some of the most popular titles of the early 2000s like The Ultimates, which is a retelling of the Avengers from the Marvel Ultimate line, Old Man Logan, which is the main inspiration for the 2017 Logan film, being the writer for the first Marvel Civil War event, which inspired the MCU film, at least with its title. In between working for the big 2, Millar was writing some small press comics, a collection of titles that would lead into his shared Miller World comic universe. Series like Kingsman, The Service, Wanted, Nemesis, Jupiter's Legacy, Starlight, Kickass, and many, many more. A lot of these comics were hits or miss. Many of them doubled as pitches or proof of concept for films or TV shows. Some of these comics did get film adaptations like Wanted, Kickass, and Kingsman. Others were picked up and optioned off by studios and are just left in Hollywood limbo. A few years back, Millar signed a deal with Netflix to pretty much give the streaming platform first dibs on adapting any of his work. So far, the only things that have come out of this deal has been the shitty Jupiter Legacy show and the spin-off anime Super Crooks, which is actually pretty amazing. Millar is a workhorse and has great business sense, but what about his work? I'd say Mark Millar is a big concept guy who can be very good at the pitching idea of a comic with the this comic is this meets that, or the this character but has this. So like we have Batman but he kills people, or we have a guy who wants to be a superhero but he has no superpowers. Things in that nature. A lot of the stuff he writes seems to be things he's trying to get adapted. Not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of stuff, but you can kind of tell with pacing and the writing of his comics. Mark Millar also has a problem with trying to be very edgy, to the point where it comes off as off-putting or makes the comics he is writing essentially childish. Like with the series of Nemesis, the first run was wildly ridiculous. One series that cements to me what Millar's tropes and writing style entails is with the subject comic of this video, Kickass. Kickass on the surface level is a great concept. A concept of some kid, a nerd, and fan of comics getting the grand idea of putting on a suit and going around trying to live out the fantasy of what he's been reading. This was a thing back in the day, people going around dressing in suits and helping regulate things on the streets. Most times just helping with like traffic control and things of that nature, picking up trash, recycling, yada, yada, yada. Most notably was the hero Phoenix Jones, who was going viral for walking around being a superhero, but was really a former MMA fighter, just fucking people up, and then a few years back got arrested for selling MDMA and coke. So yeah, as a story, Kick-Ass can be appealing to a preteen or teenage comic book fan, like I was at the time when I first read the series. As an adult, the comic stinks of incel fan fiction. Dave is just an average suburban white kid whose mom passed away unceremoniously from a brain aneurysm, now living with his reserve security guard dad. Dave has his normal teenage anxieties and worries. Dave's main goal seems to be just to get laid or at least get a little attention from his high school crush. Dave spends most of his time outside of school at his comic book shop with his homies reading comics and just hanging out. Eventually, after the monotony of everyday normal suburban life becomes too underwhelming for Dave, he gets the great idea to order a green wetsuit, ski mask, and yellow boots off eBay to go patrol and harass black and brown people just like any white man with the better than thou hero complex would do. Obviously, going around sticking your head in other people's business doesn't do anything but get Dave fucked up and lands himself in the hospital. After a few months in the hospital and recovering, Dave was back at it like a crack addict, on the street again to harass more people, comparing his obsessive urge to go and police black and brown people to that of a serial killer imagining murdering people. Only so many times you can fantasize doing something before you actually go and do it. As the story goes, the character of Kick-Ass becomes more popular, eventually landing in situations way grander and more dangerous than he ever could imagine. If you look at some of the underlying plot lines in this comic, this is where things get a bit wonky and crazy. First, outside of the white guy taking it upon himself to patrol black and brown communities, let's look at Dave's relationship with his love interest in the comic, Katie, who as a character herself not only is a love interest, at least a one-sided love interest, but also as kind of a foil and prize for Dave. Dave does the weird incel thing to Katie where he thinks that instead of talking to her, that she's just going to magically think he's amazing or something, come to her senses and fall in love with Dave. Dave never actually goes and talks to her or anything. Dave ends up gaining a relationship with Katie after his brutal assault and long stay at the hospital. Their relationship emerges because Katie believes a rumor Dave was a victim of assault from being a sex worker on the street. Dave plays along as Katie's gay BFF. As the comic goes on, Dave reveals to Katie that he is not gay and that he's actually the famous online street hero Kick-Ass. Dave thinks this will win him favors with Katie, but in actuality, it gets him cursed out and beaten up by Katie's boyfriend. Then later on that night, Dave is sent, I'm not sure what to call it, but reverse venge porn from Katie and her boyfriend getting it on, where he proceeds to cry about the photo and then Dave beats off to it. Jesus, Mark Millar, this is what I was talking about. Come on, bro. Miller does a good job on keeping the non-kick-ass Dave outside of the suit aspect. In reality, the movie retcons a lot of these darker parts of Dave's world into a more atypical superhero story. One of the biggest changes is Dave actually gets Katie to be his girlfriend after the gay BFF deception. I guess that storytelling works better for mass mainstream audiences. Showing being an incel weirdo creepo pretending to be a gay male friend to get a closer, intimate place with your crush can actually happen if you look like Aaron Johnson. We'll touch a little bit more on the film adaptation later. This leads me to my next point that makes this first story arc of Kick-Ass genius. The idea or concept of mass media manipulation. Letting your media consumption influence you to do crazy stuff is actually or could have been a really interesting social critique Millar could have hit on in this comic, something that's too prevalent in today's social media landscape, even though this comic came out before the pervasiveness of social media. I think the only prominent social media platform when this comic was out was probably Facebook and MySpace. Using the idea of loving comics and superheroes so much that you attempt to to be one. In this comic, there's, outside of Dave, the character of Big Daddy, who plays a similar role of the fanatical white male comic book fan gone crazy. Big Daddy, instead of taking out or patrolling poor people, seems to be going after crime bosses and people of that caliber. Doing so because he is just like Dave, not happy with his regular cookie cutter life as an accountant, a husband, and as a father. Big Daddy wants the excitement he is reading in his comics, so he runs away from his life, kidnaps his daughter, and trains her to be an assassin, funding her lifestyle by selling key issues of comics on eBay. Again, the Kick-Ass film subverts the genius of this character into making Big Daddy, whose name is Damon, notably never actually given a real name in the comic, to a former cop going after bad guys with his daughter because he can. Still found out to be a liar and kidnapper of his daughter Mindy, but the fanboy aspect is erased essentially, making him more of a roguish cop vigilante type guy. Another genius aspect of Kick-Ass is that it can be looked at as a commentary on the bigger concept of suburban dread, which refers to a feeling of existential unease, ennui, or anxiety associated with living in a suburban environment, often stemming from a lack of authentic community, stifling conformity, isolation, and the hollowness of superficial affluence. Dave and Damon, or Big Daddy, have this existential problem, can't handle just being normal. Millar does a great job of showing the ridiculousness of these guys who go out and dress up as heroes, although it doesn't seem to lead the characters to a rational solution. Damon gets his head popped off, and Dave continues on as Kick-Ass and even influences more people to do the same as him to become costume superheroes in the later story arcs. In my opinion, there was a missed opportunity to show that the mundane life was better than the fantastical. If Millar would have ended the first story arc in a more grounded way, but I'm sure those Hollywood checks influenced Millar to leave room to turn Kick-Ass into a franchise, which he did. Kick-Ass, in some weird way, reminds me of a classic piece of suburban dread, crazy white boy fantasy book, The Catcher in the Rye. The Catcher in the Rye is a 1951 novel by J.D. Salinger that follows the experiences of 16-year-old Holden Caulfield. After his expulsion from prep school, as he navigates New York City's and rallying against the quote-unquote phonies of the adult world, the coming-of-age story explores themes of alienation, innocence, identity, and oppression. Holden again rejects the easygoing life that he has laid out for him, revolting as teens tend to do. Holden can be seen as the first edgelord incel type character, the because we live in a society ass person, someone who no real problems externally, at least. He isn't a poor or marginalized kid, he just hates the lifestyle and the people he's around. Holden thought he knew it all, even trying to get over on a prostitute in the book, only to get finessed and his ass kicked by the sex worker and her pimp. There seems to be a similar through line among these characters, just bored with life white guys. This idea is really only afforded to certain people. Also, Catcher in the Rye influenced supposedly Mark David Chapman into shooting John Lennon. So yeah, there's again media being taken too seriously by sickos. Kick-Ass, the comic, up to a certain degree, does a really good job, whether intentional or not, of showing the ridiculousness of Dave, Mindy, and Damon's actions. Though the only real victim is Mindy, aka Hit Girl, who was raised under the false pretenses of being a hero and stopping the bad guy, where Dave and Damon take it upon themselves to hurt people. If we look at the film, we see that they completely reject the whole ridiculousness aspect of what Dave and crew are doing to add a more cool factor. As I was saying earlier, in the comic, Dave doesn't really win. He gets beaten up a bunch, sees his friends get killed, and then still doesn't get the girl. Dave is just a victim of his own actions and falls into a wormhole of worse to horrible situations. Then the comic ends with him not really learning any valuable lessons. At the very least, the reader can see that Dave's actions didn't get him anywhere productive. Dave essentially went back to square one. The 2010 film adaptation really did away with a lot of that. The film stars Aaron Johnson, McLovin, Dahmer, Chloe Grace Moretz, Nicolas Cage, and Clark Duke. Remember when Hollywood was trying to push him? The film is also directed by Matthew Vaughn, the guy who brought you the Kingmen's films, the good X-Men reboot films, and helped produce the horrible Fantastic Four film. Ugh. Let's not talk about that. I'm not sure why there was a concerted effort to reframe the themes of the comic, though the changes were very small and subtle. I believe it overall altered the message of Kick-Ass, where I see the message in the comic being dressing up like a superhero and going around and fucking with people will just get you in a world of trouble and having you surrounded by crazy people. Where in the film, it shifts to, yeah, you might run into some crazy mobsters and lunatics, but you'll still get the girl of your dreams and come out slightly unscathed. And that's just bad messaging for a mainstream audience. The movie is more incel edgelord fan fiction than the comic. Again, I'm sure Millar didn't care as long as those checks kept rolling in. Looking back at this series, even with all of its flaws, I still love it. It's still in my top 10 comics I've read because it is so layered and can be dissected in so many different ways, as great art should be. My love for this comic can't blind me to the fact that this story is, in a real way, incel fan fiction worthy. Many people are afraid to hard critique things that they love, and the nostalgic feeling for these pieces of media, as if expressing dismay for something you loved as a kid to this day is an indictment of one's worth or intelligence or anything like that. When in fact, you should be able to look back at some of the stuff you loved and say, man, that was cool when I was 16, but it's kind of ass now. That's called growth and maturity. You can also look back at something that you might have thought was horrible back then and you could think is great now. Going back to some of the albums I've mentioned earlier, Tyler the Creator's album Bastard is completely unlistenable to me. This was a tape I blasted in all day throughout middle school and high school, but I understand it is kind of cringe to listen to. And this is coming from a guy who loves Tyler the Creator. I literally have a wolf tattoo on my arm. I did this when I rewatched Breaking Bad. I loved Walter White. I even named my turtle after him. And I hated Skylar White when I first watched the show back in high school. I recently rewatched the show a few years back with my wife, and boy oh boy, Walter White is a piece of shit. Furthermore, Skylar is just a victim of his bullshit. So is pretty much every other character in the show. All in all, Kick-Ass is a great comic that I'd recommend to anyone. It has a great plot, great character development, and beautifully and masterfully crafted art from John Romita Jr., Tom Palmer, and Dean White, but it still is incel coded. Also, Mark Millar is kind of lame for real. Have you seen his Twitter post? There's so much that could be said about Mark Millar, as far as just like him as a person. Like I said, go look at his Twitter, go look at who he aligns himself with and associates with online at least. But I'll leave that for somebody else to talk about. If we strictly just talk about his comics and what he writes and creates, I would say he's A tier as far as just like popularity and status goes in the comic book industry, but I would say he's damn near like C tier when it comes to just actually creating comics. You know, at this point, he's pretty much like an IP machine. He's just putting out as much stuff as he can to see what sticks and what doesn't. And that's really been kind of noticeable, especially after like the Netflix deal and whatnot. But I mean, more power to you if you're able to get a deal like that as a writer or as a comic book creator. I don't see why you wouldn't take it. I would also say, like, if we look at some of the early works, like a Kick-Ass, right? Kick-Ass is a really good comic, and it really does hit on so many different poignant points, whether that was intentional or not, like I said earlier. But another thing that I would really want to highlight that I didn't really get to in the actual video essay part was the art. Kick-Ass was the reason I even found out about John Romita Jr., and I just loved his work on this series. Like from issue 1 to the final issue of the run, he just did a great job. Tom Palmer's inks was really great on his pencils, as well as Dean White's colors. Dean White's colors actually did a really, really good job on the colors on this book. I'm actually like baffled that he's not doing more work. It's a shame, but like the way he does the digital watercolors all over the inks and pencils, it just adds another layer of tone and dynamicism, if I said that right, to the book. But so yeah, like it's just a great comic. I actually got to meet and hang out with John Romita Jr. At GalaxyCon Richmond, like 2023, I believe. That was a great time. Great guy, super cool. Before we go check out my Patreon. If you go to subscribe to my Patreon, you'll get early access to videos, exclusive content, things of that nature. Even if you sign up as a free member, you'll get access to a lot of cool and exclusive things that are strictly on the Patreon, like my weekly pickups and things like that. Check out my second channel. My second channel, I'm putting out a lot of different videos and content on there. I'm doing live streams with indie creators, weekly live streams and interviews. I'm also doing comic book recommendations and manga recommendation videos. I'm also putting out a line of videos on my sketchbooks, and then I'm moving forward. I'll probably do videos showing like my original art and things like that. So go check out Kova's Lookout Live as well. Don't forget, I am a comic book creator as well. Go to my website, avoxcomics.com. You can pick up any of my comics that are available, AWOL issue number 1, number 2, and all of my other comics. I also have some comics up there for free to download. I appreciate you guys for watching this video to the end. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that hype button if that's there, or is that still a thing? And yeah, thanks.